And I mean, he should be able to assume that, but obviously they weren't, because during the lame duck period, they built the force up from now this roughly 600, originally 300, then they pushed it to 600 right at the end. Then they got it up to almost roughly 3,000 people. Now, the brigade itself only had roughly 1,400 people in the brigade, but there was another 1,600 or so that were involved in this operation in one way, shape, or form. So, and then they put Eisenhower's stamp of approval on it in front of Kennedy. So Kennedy now, a person could look back and go, well, gee, Kennedy was ignorant. Well, yeah, well, why was he ignorant? Because the people that were supposed to be telling him the facts and the truth were lying. Okay, they were lying. The other thing is the agency isn't good at military operations. I mean, that's not what they're supposed to be doing. That was never part of their charter, and even their expanded charter that they now enjoy, such leeway. It's not even in that charter. This is not a military, organization. So, once you get above a 300-man mark and, you're pushing it at 500, you're really running huge risks because it's a military operation. This is no longer something that you can conduct covertly without a whole lot of difficulty. So it was at this time when they started to have to bring in more and more military consultants in order to, to figure out what was going on. Now, I'm not sure, I've got it here somewhere, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure the exact date when Hawkins was brought in. But I do know that Hawkins was adamant about control of the air, that it was the most essential, feature of the invading brigade. Obviously, provided the brigade landing and everything would need to be trained, highly trained, in their role as well. But what his thrust is assuming they're the best of the best of the best. If we don't have control of the air, it's not going to do any good at all. They're going to get wiped out. It's not going to work. And other military planners were in agreement on that. So the original plans for all this were, roughly debated. I mean, it was, like we were talking about, adversarial relationship after adversarial relationship. It was hot and heavy. I mean, there was a lot of disagreement on how to do it, and the difficulties that they were going to be faced because they had these restrictions of it being a covert operation, yet it was too big to try to keep quiet. So there was a whole lot of problem with it, especially when you're going to have to involve air assets to control the air. So this is what Kennedy ended up, finding himself in the middle of. You with me so far, Len?
Oh yeah.
All right. Because I know I'm rambling a little here, but let me just keep on rambling. So I'm just going to kind of fast forward here, and we know that. Let's establish a couple of things. The first thing is we know that the Department of Defense, which of course originally had been the Department of War, people should keep that in mind. It's really important. The Department of Defense, their job is to win. Their job isn't to hide. Their job isn't to be discreet. Their job is shock and awe. Okay, that's what the job of the military is. And the military is a proud organization. They like credit for what they do. Not so much maybe because they need a pat on the back, but because they're patriotic. Okay, so and I'm not endorsing that, and I'm not disrespecting it. It is what it is. But they're not covert operators, okay, any more than the CIA is a military operation. So you've got these real conflicting interests within the administration between the military and between the CIA, and who gets stuck right in the center between the Department of Defense and the intelligence community is the State Department. Because the State Department, well, what are they going to be, faced with if something goes wrong? Well, we just got done saying, the political ramifications would be a violation of international law if it was a military operation launched by the United States against Cuba. The State Department's the one's going to have to deal with the United Nations if we were to do something like that. So the State Department, they have a completely different role than the War Department, than the Department of Defense. They're going to have to pick up the pieces. They're the ones that are going to have to deal with the political ramifications. So as far as Dean Rusk was concerned, the Secretary of State, we can't have something that's loud. We can't have something that is going to draw attention that the United States was behind it. It's got to be credible. It's got to be something that could plausibly be denied. It's got to credibly come from anti-Castro Cubans. If it doesn't, we've just violated international law. We might as well have just sent in the Marines and the Air Force and everybody else. See? So Rusk, from the very beginning, was screaming that the whole thing looked like it was too fast, too loud, too big, in the wrong area. We're not going to get away with it. And you can't use any planes. Are you kidding me? Are you going to send planes in? This isn't going to work. And you just have to, and understandably, in one respect, understandably, don't get me wrong. I don't hold Dean Rusk in high regard. But in one sense, maybe he had a point. Kennedy must have thought he had a point. So Kennedy instructed the agency to scour for, alternate landing locations besides Trinidad. So after quite a time, they came up with the Bay of Pigs. And they made some fundamental errors. They didn't realize a lot of stuff, that there was coral, that the ships were going to go aground on coral. It's a big problem. They didn't realize that the people that, they were saying could go in Trinidad. It was really close to the, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Ascombray Mountains. And they could go guerrilla and probably make a good escape through there. That was what, in Trinidad. But this was a good distance. The Bay of Pigs was a lot farther away. And they had to go through swampland, with like Everglade type areas in there. And they also weren't informed that they could have dug down roughly 3 feet to get fresh drinking water. I mean, there's so many things that they were ill-trained for for this operation. So the CIA made a lot of mistakes, obviously, picking the Bay of Pigs. But many times it has been argued that the plan was so badly constructed that it had no chance of success. Okay? Now, in light of everything I just said, that all the conflict going on and all the restrictions because of State Department concerns that were put on it because this was becoming a paramilitary or military operation where it really shouldn't have been, okay, it did have serious restrictions on it. But Kennedy was saying, look, is there a way for us to work within those restrictions and still meet the objective? That's what I'm tasking you to do. Okay, I want you to find a way to get it done anyway within the restrictions of 5412/2. So the CIA apparently set out to do that, ostensibly anyway. They set out to do it. Now, did they actually come up with a plan that apparently would work? Did they actually train people well in order to accomplish the task? That's our next question. Okay. In other words, was this doomed to fail from the very beginning? Would it have, if the plan had been pulled off exactly from A to Z as planned, would it have worked? Okay. Let's see. We don't know for sure. How come? Well, because it wasn't pulled off as it should have been. But let's see what they thought about it. Okay. So 3 days before D-Day, on the 13th of the D-Day for the Bay of Pigs was 17 April 1961. On the 13th of April 1961, an emergency cable was sent to Colonel Jack Hawkins at Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua, by the project chief. Okay? The project chief on this was J.C. King. He was the Western Hemisphere project chief for the Central Intelligence Agency. So let me read this to you. It only has 2 items in the cable, and it says, A, please advise emergency precedents. Let me say this again. This is from J.C. King to Colonel Jack Hawkins while Hawkins is in Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua. For the benefit of the audience, we used Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua as the base for the B-26 bombers that we had given to the anti-Castro Cubans, or maybe sold to them for $1 or something, to the anti-Castro Cubans so that they could be used in support for air cover during the Bay of Pigs. These were not United States equipment at that time, and they were not to be piloted by United States military personnel. They were Cuban pilots, and these were now Cuban aircraft. Fletcher Prouty had been tasked with outfitting them before we gave these B-26 bombers to the anti-Castro Cubans by putting 8 50 caliber machine guns in each of their noses. At COPA, somebody asked me the question, why were we using B-26s? They're not that good a plane. And that, the answer to that is yes and no, okay? It's not a bad plane, but was it outdated? Sure. But the problem was this. The thing that made them good was we had widely disseminated them throughout the world, particularly in Latin America. So it was plausibly deniable that our hand was in this. These B-26s were credibly owned by the anti-Castro Cubans. So that's the reason for using the B-26 bombers. So they had outfitted 16 of these and put them down in Nicaragua at this base. And this is where Brigade 2506 eventually was doing all of their training, and the pilots were, flying practice missions and getting familiar with the planes and how they operated and maneuvered and this and that and the other thing. Okay, so that's the reason why this cable went down to Colonel Jack Hawkins, who was now visiting them, all the troops, the anti-Castro Cuban troops there. So again, I'm going to read it. A, please advise emergency precedents if your experiences during the last few days have in any way changed your evaluation of the brigade. And B, and everybody wait for this in the audience, listening audience, ready? And B, it says, for your information, the president has stated that under no conditions will U.S. intervene with any U.S. forces. And I'm going to repeat it for emphasis, because Kennedy has gotten thrown under the bus so many times for not sending in A-4s from the USS Essex that was off the coast of Cuba during the Bay of Pigs. Let me repeat this. And the reason they say the anti-Castro Cubans hated him possibly was because he failed to provide promised U.S. air support there. Let me read this to you again. For your information, the president has stated that under no conditions will U.S. intervene with any U.S. forces. Okay? So this cable that's sent from J.C. King down to Hawkins is asking him, look, you've been there for a few days. Have your opinions changed? Because right now it's a green light. It's a go. What's your opinion now? And by the way, just reminding everybody, president says it's covert, no U.S. intervention. Okay? And it says, number 2, following is the text of Colonel Hawkins' reply of the same day. So Hawkins cabled back, and he said, A, my observations the last few days have increased my confidence in the ability of this force to accomplish not only initial combat missions, but also the ultimate objective of Castro's overthrow. B, referencing paragraph 1 above, I arrived during the final briefing of the brigade and battalion commanders. Now listen to this, folks in the audience. They now know all details of the plan and are enthusiastic. These officers, now this is Hawkins talking, by the way. He is considered an expert in these operations, okay? He was negative on the plan initially going in because of the restrictions. They worked the restrictions out, and now he's reporting back, and he says, these officers are young, vigorous, intelligent, motivated with a fanatical urge to begin battle, for which most of them have been preparing in the rugged conditions of training camps for almost a year. I have talked to many of them in their language, because he spoke Spanish fluently. Without exception, they have utmost confidence in their ability to win. They say they know their own people and believe after they've inflicted one serious defeat upon opposing forces, the latter will melt away from Castro, who they have no wish to support. They say it is Cuban tradition to join a winner, and they have supreme confidence that they will win all engagements against the best Castro has to offer, and I share their confidence. C, the brigade is well organized and is more heavily armed and better equipped in some respects than U.S. infantry units. The men have received intensive training in the use of their weapons, including more firing experience than U.S. troops would normally receive. I was impressed with the serious attitude of the men as they arrived here and moved to their ships. Movements were quiet, disciplined, and efficient, and the embarkation was accomplished with remarkable smoothness. D, the brigade now numbers 1,400, a truly formidable force. E, this is important, Len, listen to this one. I have also carefully observed the Cuban Air Force. The aircraft are kept with pride, and some of the B-26 crews are so eager to commence contemplated operations that they have already armed their aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel George Gaines, U.S. Air Force, informed me today that he considers the B-26 squadron equal to the best U.S. Air Force squadron. And F, listen to it, folks. The brigade officers do not expect help from U.S. armed forces. They only ask for continued delivery of supplies. This can be done covertly. And G, the Cuban Air Force is motivated, strong, well-trained, armed to the teeth, and ready. I believe profoundly that it would be a serious mistake for the United States to deter it from its intended purpose. Okay? I've got copy 1 of 5, distribution, General Taylor, Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, J.C. King, and J.D. Esterline. So this cable, Len, was sent to Colonel Hawkins in Puerto Cabezas, and that's his reply back 3 days before the Bay of Pigs. Now, it doesn't sound to me like these people were not trained right. It doesn't look to me like there was any doubt. This is a senior military person at this stage. He's in the Marine Corps. He'd seen action in World War II. Here's a guy who knew his stuff really well. Here was a guy who was kind of against it at the beginning, who had worked out the details and now is completely for it. There's no hesitation. I mean, he's surprisingly for the operation at this stage. Okay? In context, I think it's also important to point out that the official stance here behind the scenes was made clear regarding Kennedy's letting everybody know there's not going to be any intervention of U.S. forces. And Hawkins says that the anti-Castro Cubans themselves don't expect it. And the reason this is important is because these guys have been named as suspects in Kennedy's murder because they resented the fact that he broke his promise. Well, he didn't break his, he never made the promise. In fact, it was never part of the plan. It wasn't even a part of the plan. They didn't even expect it. What would they be resenting? Something that he never even promised. See? So it's a ridiculous premise, but the agency made this up as they went along, and they promoted it for 50 years. Let me go on here. I said to myself, what if these are the top secret documents? Right? This is the behind the scenes stuff that they were in the planning operation. What if the anti-Castro Cubans themselves, however, had heard Kennedy, make some remarks, right, off the cuff, or, had an interview or something, and they were led to believe wrongly, mistakenly, that the United States was going to do whatever it took, to defeat Fidel Castro or to support these exiles or whatever. What if he had done that? And so they heard that and they believed that over the official thing that they had just been told by Colonel Hawkins. What if that had happened? Well, 5 days before D-Day at a press conference on April 12th, President Kennedy was asked, quote, "How far would the U.S. go to help an uprising against Castro?" End quote. And President Kennedy's response is this: "First, I want to say that there will not be, under any conditions, an intervention in Cuba by the United States Armed Forces. This government will do everything it possibly can. I think it can meet its responsibilities to make sure that there are no Americans involved in any actions inside Cuba. The basic issue in Cuba is not one between the United States and Cuba. It is between the Cubans themselves." End quote. So, in less than a week before the invasion, we've got two things: the public statements of Kennedy that we're not going to do anything with our armed forces against Cuba, and behind the scenes, Kennedy makes the statement again, and it's confirmed by Hawkins that not only doesn't seem like it's even needed, in his opinion, and no one's expecting it. Okay? You with me, Len?
Right here.
All right. Any questions so far? Any clarifications I need to make for the audience that maybe I'm missing?
No.
No? Okay. All right. So next stage here gets real important. So again, let's go back to Dean Rusk for a second in the State Department. And let's go back to the plan, okay? The plan did include air support, but the source of the air support is the key to what went wrong and to why the agency was able to methodically and insidiously create a situation initially to blackmail Kennedy and try to force his hand. And when it didn't work, they created a cover story that they perpetuated for 50 years. You know, I went and checked, before I went to Dallas, I checked Britannica online. They have the same crap on there. That Kennedy, you know, basically broke his promise, or he failed to provide air support. And you can go on Wikipedia, of course, that trash hole, and they're going to tell you the same thing. And I'll tell you where their source is, right? Their source for it is unbelievable. You wouldn't even think that this guy, and I'll get to, I'm jumping ahead, I'll get to him in a minute, but it's, what's his name, Kornblue from the National Security Archives? Unbelievable what he's written, right? The same junk, all right? So the reason I get kind of adamant about this is our history, and it's been butchered for such a long, long time. But what was the plan? So the real plan was this. Because these people were trained so well, as Hawkins has just told us, right? They're going to get the job done when they get there, provided, number one, that they get there. So you got to supply them well. Provided when they get there, they can hold the beach where they, where they're landing at, and they can secure an airfield, which there was, by the way, there were 2 airfields south of the Bay of Pigs, not the one to the north that everyone always talks about. I believe the north, or maybe it's even the east that everyone talks about. There were 2 south of the Bay of Pigs that were there for the taking. So this would not have been monumental. But the point was this: once, I talk to people sometimes about this when we're talking about Israel, and I'm not going to digress farther, but I think Vatican City is the only piece of real estate in the world that can claim that it's a sovereign state that does not have to physically be able to retain the real estate. In other words, part of the world we live in, whether we like it or not, is the ability, if you want to be a country, you can go ahead and take a piece of land, it's all jump in a boat and go across San Diego Bay and, try to wrestle the Coronado Island from the Navy, right? Good luck with that. Not going to work. But if you're able to do it and you're able to claim that as your place, well, you better be able to hold on to it militarily, because if you can't, someone's going to come and take it from you, and you don't have an Israel, or you don't have a Vatican City. Vatican City, I don't think has to worry about it, but you don't have a United States. You don't have any country that can't hold on to their real estate is going to lose it, right? But what you can do is, if you're able to hold a beachhead in Cuba and establish a airfield so that you can run your 16 B-26 bombers that you've gotten from the United States legally, and you can claim a provisional government status or a government in exile status, it is then possible to get one of the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations to recognize you. Now, it's a bit of a stretch, but it's a possibility. It's a possibility. At the very least, you may be able to get support from people in Cuba. I mean, that would be the ultimate goal, right? Because you don't want to just shove people in through the Bay of Pigs and everybody on the island hate them. So, but there are ways of accomplishing this. So the plan was viable as long as you could get the people safely to the beaches. You could have them supplied with enough ammunition and food and rations and that type of thing. And the only way to make sure that you're going to ensure that part is successful so that they can retain some real estate is that you have control of the air, which is what Hawkins had been saying from the beginning. But the State Department said, well, we're not going to be able to do that, and they're going to know it's going to come from the United States. Come on, there's no way. But Hawkins said you can't have any of Castro's Air Force operational that day because they've got T-33 jets. He's had 10 or 11 of those. He had 3 or 4 or 5 Sea Furies, and he had some B-26s of his own, and I think a Lodestar. So the idea was we would send in, not us, but the plan was that all 16 originally of the B-26 bombers would go in 2 days before D-Day on the 15th of April and take out all of Castro's Air Force while it was on the ground. That's what the attempt would be anyway. And then we'd have a U-2 flight go over and see if anything was left over, or we'd have eyes on the ground that would tell us if there was more stuff that needed to be taken out. Well, Rusk didn't like the idea of there being 16 used because of whatever reason. It was going to be another issue of it being too loud. So they cut the number in half, and they sent 8 out instead. I think Cabell's the one who ordered that. So the idea was they were going to have these 8 B-26 bombers now go in, take out all of Castro's Air Force on the ground, and then leave, and then land in Miami. One of them, anyway, would land in Miami, and it was going to be marked up with Castro's own markings on it, his own Air Force's markings on this B-26 bomber. And the Cuban pilot, the anti-Castro Cuban pilot that would get out, was going to claim that he defected from Cuba. And on his way out, he blew up as much stuff as he could. Okay? So that would give some plausible deniability to the United States. It was a defection, and it would put the seed in everyone's mind in Cuba that, hey, you know, there's a defection going on. There's some people who don't like Castro. He's not quite as strong, you know, as we thought. And, you know, a lot of the Air Force got completely wiped out, or a lot of it got wiped out, and this and that and the other thing. So that was what the hope was. Good plan, bad plan, who knows? But that was what the plan was. So they took out all of the T-33s with the exception of 3 of them, which, by the way, as you know, is what Fletcher Prouty said. He got the number right, 3 of them. And that's confirmed now through newly declassified documents, right? There were also some Sea Furies. I don't think Prouty really mentioned the Sea Furies, and the reason I think he left them out is that they didn't amount to too much consequence, to be honest with you. We had 16 B-26 bombers, right? 12 of them were taken out by T-33s. We'll get to this in a minute. And 2 were taken out by Sea Furies, and 2 were taken out that were low flying, were taken out by artillery, okay? So, but the plan had been, you send in these B-26s on the 15th, take out as many as you can, have people land in Miami, claim that they defected. What happened instead is Castro took a look at the pictures that were taken, and he said, well, look here. This is not my plane. He's screaming in the UN. This is not my plane. Doesn't even look like my plane. These aren't the markings of the Castro of our Air Force. Look at the nose. My noses are all made of plexiglass. These are opaque. I don't have 50 caliber machine guns in the noses of my B-26s. This isn't a defection. So Adlai Stevenson hadn't been read in on the mission. So he's arguing that it was a defection. Well, he ends up, when he's faced with the pictures and the proof of it, he ends up looking either like he wasn't trusted enough by the administration to be read in on the mission, or he knew all about it and he's lying through his teeth at the UN. Either way, he looks real bad. So he has a conniption fit on the 15th and on the 16th, the day before the brigade was to launch and, you know, they were supposed to be arriving at the Bay of Pigs in the wee hours of the 17th of April. So on the night of the 16th, because Rusk had been browbeaten by his own subordinate, Adlai Stevenson, because Adlai Stevenson was, you know, screaming that we're not going to be able to keep this covert. They're going to know it's the United States. Are you kidding me? Because the second part of the air attack was what? On the morning of D-Day, pre-dawn, the remainder of Castro's Air Force was to be taken out. Kennedy had reserved the right all the way up until 24 hours before the mission to cancel, okay? The last standing order on the 16th of April was all of the Air Force, Castro's Air Force, had to be taken out while it was on the ground, or you're to scrub the mission. This was understood by everybody, including Hawkins. My God, he was the one who was screaming the most about having to have control of the air. It was understood by Cabell and by Bissell. It was understood by everybody that was in the intelligence end of this. Everybody that was in the military support of this was aware of this, okay? Rusk was aware of this. Adlai Stevenson had a conniption fit because he was embarrassed in the UN. He ends up prevailing on Rusk. Rusk picks up the phone, makes a call to McGeorge Bundy. McGeorge Bundy is told you have to cancel the pre-dawn airstrikes because of what happened at the UN 2 days ago, and you know we won't be able to hide our hand in it, and that's blah, 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 and all that stuff. Rusk wasn't the military man. Neither was Bundy. But they do have common roots. So Bundy picks up the phone, and at 9:30 he calls General C.P. Cabell, U.S. Air Force. He's the deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Allen Dulles is out of the country in Puerto Rico. He's going to be giving a speech at some college.